Before I start this off, let me make something really clear. I love Resident Evil, but not just the games. Oh no, not just the games. I love Resident Evil the book. All the Resident Evil books. Resident Evil the comic book. Resident Evil the manga. Resident Evil the money clip. Resident Evil the mint tin. Resident Evil the watch. Resident Evil the patches. Resident Evil the hat. Resident Evil the custom stars logo. Resident Evil the keys. Resident Evil the rat! No, wait. No. Dorothy, I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'll give you a treat. Just please don't tell your mother. I have the Collector's Edition Chainsaw Controller. I even have the games nobody likes and the Collector's Editions of the games nobody likes. I have a Resident Evil umbrella. I have Resident Evil toys. I have both the original Resident Evil Gaiden and the never-released Resident Evil Game Boy version. Oh, and I have all the movies, too. I have Resident Evil I don't even know what this is. I have Resident Evil the candle, for crying out loud. I play Resident Evil while I play Resident Evil. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page with me in knowing how much I love this franchise and how I'm pretty much willing to own anything from it. Before I say, Resident Evil Vendetta is the worst Resident Evil thing ever made. And no, don't start typing yet, I know what you're thinking. My hate for this film has nothing to do with the fact that it's an action movie. The other two animated films were also pretty action heavy as well. No, I hate Resident Evil Vendetta because it's not only a terribly written, terribly made film, but that it actively shits on these characters and everything these characters have ever stood for throughout the franchise. Even worse, it not only shits on these characters and their universe, but it's also a canon story to the games. That puts it in a whole nother league than the live-action films. At least those can be stupid all on their own and won't ever affect the video games. I mean, you know, at least in a meaningful way. We start the movie following a Mexican military platoon who have been tasked to hunt down a weapons dealer. Chris Redfield is with them, looking noticeably not like his RE7 version. The weapons dealer is Glenn Arias, who has supposedly gotten his hands on a BOW. Chris specifically is hunting down a BSAA agent and her son who went missing searching for Arias. I'd like to point out that Chris is the only BSAA operative on this mission. This movie has me convinced that the BSAA are nothing but reckless assholes. So there's a spooky mansion, and of course, because everyone in the RE universe is an idiot, everyone but Chris has never heard of a zombie before, and they're all immediately killed. Sure, it's spooky and gory, but this is ridiculous. Zombies have existed for 20 years in this universe, and Chris is the only member of this military group that has ever even heard of them? Anyway, Chris makes it outside The Only Survivor, where he runs into Glenn Arias, looking spooky. Glenn manages to kick the shit out of him in the first of this movie's goofy fights. Yeah, I don't hate the fights, but they are dumb. And then we're introduced to Bane and Vampirella. I don't know their real names, but that's what I'm calling them, and the zombified version of the BSAA agent that went missing. Glenn leaves Chris to die at the hands of the zombie agent and all the other zombies that are in the mansion when a helicopter shows up and blows them all away like should have been from the very start. The mansion explodes or something, I'm not sure what it hit exactly, and we're treated to... Right after the credits are over, we're treated to a memory of why Glenn Arias is such an asshole. Turns out that his wife and his entire wedding was bombed the day of. And we're treated to our second of the goddamn movie. It hasn't even been 5 minutes yet. Anyway, we switch over to Rebecca Chambers, who is one of the reasons I was actually really excited for this movie, as she's one of my favorite characters. This is the first time that we've seen her since Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil the stage notwithstanding. In the meantime, inside the very building Rebecca's in, Vampirella unleashes a virus gas. I guess she's immune, because she's standing really close to that fart gas there. Anyway, Rebecca gets infected, but luckily enough, she's been working on a cure for the virus, and injects herself right away, so she's A-OK hunky-dory. Just like Leon in RE6, Rebecca forgets that viruses make people into zombies, but at least we get a nice little nod to the head-turner from RE1. Rebecca gets attacked and manages to kill that zombie, but there's more zombies, but luckily enough, the BSAA are there instantly in the fastest operation I think they've ever had in the series. Chris and Rebecca catch up a little bit, and we get a cute little nod to RE0, but then this happens.
But shouldn't I be in quarantine?
Quarantine takes too long, and I need you now.
Fucking what? With the viruses and death. Quarantine takes too long? What the fuck? Anyway, so Chris reveals that Glenn Arias is using old Neo Umbrella and Tricell technology. Yeah, the bad guys from Resident Evil 5 and 6, respectively. And he's been using this new virus to peddle it to destabilize nations across the globe. Meanwhile, Rebecca has discovered that his new virus contains some sort of DNA from Las Plagas from Resident Evil 4. So this new virus is a combination of everything from RE4, 5, and 6. Apparently it's so that he can control the virus better, domesticate them. They find Leon since he's a Las Plagas expert, and it turns out, oh no, Leon has copied Chris Redfield's backstory from Resident Evil 6. He's a drunken, belligerent asshole who's really sad after a whole bunch of soldiers we've never heard of that were under his command died in a scene we didn't see. Boo fucking who. They fight about it for a little bit, and Rebecca stands up and goes to take a pee. Once Rebecca's all empty, Vampirella comes out of nowhere and kidnaps her! In the meantime, Bane shows up and blows the building they're in to pieces. Chris and Leon are of course fine, they're main characters, there's no way they're ever going to get struck with a stray bullet. Chris then sees Rebecca being taken away, and now the mystery is afoot. Chris and Leon are left with nothing but a sample of Rebecca's antivirus blood and her research notes. In the meantime, Rebecca wakes up aboard the holodeck in a creepy reimagining of Glenn Arias' wedding, also wearing her wedding dress. Glenn and Rebecca have a little mental sparring match where Rebecca reveals that she's more or less figured out the way Glenn Arias' new virus works. It requires 2 viruses to control a host perfectly. And there's also something about water in there that I didn't really understand, and Rebecca also has a brilliant moment where she discovers that the spooky gas was probably virus gas. Who could have thunk it? In the meantime, Chris and Leon figure out that there's also probably an antivirus to help Glenn maintain control. But then Glenn Arias reveals the spooky reason that he kidnapped Rebecca in the first place. Are you ready?
My wife. You look so much like her.
I can't get the cat on! No!
What freaking grade schooler wrote this script? This is like a joke plot twist in a parody of bad movies. Seriously, who wrote this and then went, yeah, that's okay, let's keep that in? So Rebecca turns out to not really be a fan of being Crazy Bucket's Bride 2.0, and so he unleashes the new virus across New York City, making it the 3rd city in a Resident Evil history, just in the US, to have been struck with a virus attack. I remember the good old days when Raccoon City was unique. Anyway, the virus spreads and only hits the people that have already been infected with the trigger virus, meaning that only about 50% of the population have actually been infected. This is important, remember this. So the city's all burning and is in hell and everything, and the BSAA show up with Chris Redfield and Leon Kennedy leading the pack. And Leon ends up fighting some Cerberus on a highway, which leads to the thing that made me the angriest about this movie. Let's see if you can spot it. Remember, these are normal people on this highway. They are not zombies. Yeah, so Leon just killed, at a minimum, 2 people, the drivers, and at a maximum, I'm going to say between 7 and 8. As a refresher, here's Leon from 2 movies ago.
Please, Leon, don't try to save me.
If you don't try to save one life, you'll never save any!
Remember what I said about the BSAA being reckless assholes? So, just for shits and giggles, I'm gonna put a kill counter for the heroes in the corner. While Leon's murdering people, Glenn Arias has Rebecca infected with a new version of the virus derived from her blood. I don't know what makes Rebecca special, the movie doesn't explain this, but Rebecca's infected and she'll die in about 30 minutes. But Chris and Leon manage to catch up and break into the building, where we have the movie's most famous scene. This is the one that was marketed, and it's the one that everybody was talking about. I'm not wholly against it. I've never seen John Wick, which I understand the scene is heavily influenced by. If it was a real human being doing this, I think it might be impressive, but as it is, it's just kind of boring, honestly. Chris manages to find Rebecca with 10 minutes to spare, but he doesn't have an antivirus, so at the moment, she's still infected and counting down. Then we get the best fight scene ever put in movie history. Don't you worry, folks, this stupidity isn't over yet. Bane shows up and transforms into a big tentacle thing, and then proceeds to absorb Glenn's body into himself, thus creating Glenn Bane. Yeah, so the final battle proceeds. But this time, Chris is helping Rebecca, so it's up to Leon, who shows up out of nowhere, to help fight him off. But he's a little bit too powerful, and Rebecca's running out of time, so they gotta do something, right? The BSAA buddies show up at the last second, and wouldn't you know it, with the most powerful weapon of all, a railgun? Okay, well, just make sure that you hit your target. No, you can't say, well, maybe the building was just all full of zombies. The zombie infection only spread through about half the city, which means that the other half is still fine. Which means that potentially half, if not more, of that building was still innocent civilians. The BSAA are reckless assholes. Glenn Bane jumps up onto the helicarrier and starts to tear the shit out of it, but luckily enough for the BSAA buddies, Leon's there with his trusty motorcycle to save the day. He sends it spinning off the edge of the building, and just as it lodges itself into Glenn Bane, he shoots the gas tank, rupturing it, which blows Bane right off of the helicarrier and presumably to his death. But no! He manages to survive, and then Chris pulls out the big gun and blows him up for good, in classic Resident Evil fashion. So, did they kill their buddies there? I honestly can't tell. So they get the antivirus just in time, and Rebecca's fine, thank God. I would have been really upset if she died in this movie. And then everybody's happy. Except for the stupidest thing I have ever seen in cinema history. It turns out that Glenn Arias' antivirus can be dispersed just like a gas, just like the regular virus was. And it turns out that the antivirus doesn't just keep you from turning into a zombie if you're already infected, it actively reverses the symptoms of infection, meaning that if you're already a zombie and have been a zombie, you will turn back into a human. This is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Anyone who has ever seen a zombie movie, read a zombie book, watched a zombie TV show, played a zombie game will tell you this is the dumbest thing anyone has ever tried to do with zombies. Let me calm down and let me explain. This now means that all of the zombies that Leon and Chris killed in this totally awesome fight scene in the hallway are now humans that they killed. It means that every single zombie that the BSAA killed in this movie, they are directly responsible for the deaths of the humans that the zombies were, because they could have been turned back. That's not good. That makes them seem even more careless than usual. So, time to add some more numbers to the kill counter. Another problem that we run into is that a lot of these zombies are rotting, or they were infected by bite wounds, which means that they're missing limbs, flesh, potentially organs, and of course a shitload of blood. Some of them might have just gotten beat the shit out of by Chris and Leon here during this scene and not actually died, which means that when the antivirus gas comes, a lot of the zombies will come back to life as normal human beings, full of holes, missing limbs, missing organs, and will die instantly, horribly, and painfully. And since we've determined that about half the population of New York City was infected, let's take a wild guess and say that about half of those zombies were in this state, which means that the number of zombies that came back to life as humans and died instantly would actually be... Oh, that's a really high number. But let's go back to the very beginning of the outbreak. Remember, the virus only infected about half the population, which meant that the other half were normal humans. Now let's say that, well, for instance, this guy right here in the red shirt comes back as a normal human being after the antivirus is spread. He gets to go home and live a happy life for the rest of his days as a normal human being. Well, I'll tell you one thing, the writers didn't think about this, because if this guy comes back as a perfectly normal human being, he's going to be seeing his wife or girlfriend there's hair in his shit for a week. So yeah, I hate this movie. I hate everything about this movie. It was cool seeing Rebecca again, and I actually really like the soundtrack. I recommend the soundtrack. But outside of that, the writing was terrible, the characters were stupid, the action was boring and way too long, and overall it was just a really bad, uncomfortable movie. I don't care that it's an action movie, but I do care that it's a really bad movie. If I was able to give Umbrella Corps a 3, if I was able to give Resident Evil The Final Chapter a 2, then Resident Evil Vendetta gets my very first 1 out of 10.